Yeah, so there was one question that I already gave a brief answer to in the chat, and this was about whether essentially like how many CSV files do you need to upload, and like whether you need separate CSV files for separate analysis. So maybe you can explain a little bit what's required, what's optional.
Yes, absolutely. So I will go into RevMan here. Let me just double check. You are seeing RevMan, right?
Yes.
Good. We go into the template option for the import. And so if you don't have any studies, you will need the study information sheet. And if you want to import results, you will need study arms and study results as well. So basically the three ones that I showed you is the basis if you don't have any data already in the review. However, if you already have studies, you can also use the import to update existing studies and to add new studies. Basically, you need study arms and study results if you want to import results. If you want to import risk of bias 2 data, you will need to have either results in the review or the study results sheet and arm sheet as well. And I think that sums it up, hopefully. So I don't know if it would actually be helpful to show the result sheet again, because one of the questions was whether you need one sheet per analysis. So let's just share this again. I hope you're seeing.
Yep, we're seeing Excel now.
Great. So basically, you don't need one sheet per analysis. As you can see, this one includes all the result data, and it's organized according to outcome here. So you can see there's data for different outcomes in the same sheet. And also, all of the analysis that we looked at was derived from this data reported on this outcome. So from this data, you can create several analyses because the data is stored on the study rather than in the analysis. So reusing data is one of the big benefits of this process.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question is essentially, do you still need to manually set the graph labels, or can those will those be set automatically based on the interventions and the outcome?
I love that we get that question, because that's something that you at the moment do need to add manually, but it's something that we really want to introduce. So it's great to hear that you're asking for it. It means that we have more data to inform our RevMan web roadmap, because I guess that's another point to make. We're launching this workflow now, but we are continuously updating RevMan, and we have several improvements relating to study-centric data that we want to plan. So knowing that you ask for this is good information. And
excellent. Okay, I think I'm going to stay with the theme of feature requests for a little bit. So there's a question: is it possible to do network meta-analysis with the new RevMan?
So we don't have support for the network meta-analysis methods, and I think in the future we might not implement the statistical methods. However, the fact that we are storing the result data on the studies, and the fact that we now have this concept of study arms, means that we're a lot better prepared to, for example, import data and also and then potentially uploading the results into RevMan. I can see my internet connection is a bit unstable, so do let me know if you can't hear me anymore.
We lost you for like a very brief moment, so I hope that was clear, and if not, we'll probably get some follow-on questions in the chat. So another question here is about global changes. I think it's like if you have many analyses that have some of the same properties, and you kind of need to have the same settings applied consistently to some of them. Is that something that we support in any way?
So we don't really support that at the moment. So when you edit an analysis group, what you can do is you can set the graph labels, and that will populate. But we are actually also considering how we can improve this process. I think what we need to be mindful about is making sure that reviews still only have the analysis that are relevant. We don't want to support reviews that have so many analyses that they're not easy to digest. Of course, that's more of a review inclusion question. But yeah, it's something we're looking into as a potential improvement. And maybe I should say that for any of these suggestions, if you are interested in sort of joining how we prepare or prioritize features, you can maybe share your contact details with support@cochrane.org, and we can follow up, and because we're really interested in engaging with users and getting your feedback on both priorities, but also how we implement the features.
All right, I've got a final feature request theme, and then we'll move on to other questions. So the question is, can systematic reviews of observational studies be done in RevMan Web?
So we have a type of analysis that's called other data. I don't think that it so that's not supported with this study-centric data workflow, but I think that's the closest. Maybe Rachel, you know more how observational studies are usually designed, or reviews with observational studies.
Yes, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to use data from observational studies in RevMan Web, because you can still obviously set up meta-analyses and syntheses without meta-analyses using data from observational studies. The thing obviously that we emphasize is that you don't combine data from observational studies, non-randomized data. You don't combine non-randomized data with data from randomized studies, whether that's in a meta-analysis or in another synthesis.
Thanks. All right. Then I'm going back a little bit in the timeline. There was a question about the data import and how that works with Covidence.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, Covidence has worked on supplying files that RevMan can import. So if you're using Covidence and their data extraction 1.0, which is the one that's most suitable for Cochrane reviews, you will now have a new option to export into CSV for RevMan Web, and that can, if you define your review criteria, be imported into RevMan. I believe there either has been or will be a webinar on this that we can share.
It's
with
tomorrow
you.
At this time. Yeah.
Yes. So it's very soon.
I've just linked that in the chat.
Perfect.
For those who are interested. Okay, so there's one more question about whether there will also be training webinars for DTA reviews or prognostic reviews.
Right. Okay, so I think that's maybe a more general question in relation to the RevMan rollout and starting to use RevMan compared to using RevMan 5, because DTA reviews and prognosis reviews aren't using this study-centric data approach. At the moment, we don't have any webinars planned for those review types, but it would be really interesting if you or a group of people are interested in that, then we can consider it.
Great. Let's see if I've missed anything. There are a couple of new questions. All right, there's a question, can non-Cochrane reviews be carried out using RevMan Web?
Yes. So RevMan Web is available for non-Cochrane use. Maybe Geert, you can pop the link to the landing page where you can find a subscription. So if you're using RevMan Web for a non-Cochrane review, you will need to buy a subscription. However, there's a discount for academics and also for authors of Cochrane reviews. So if it's free for the Cochrane reviews, but if you're as a Cochrane author also writing another systematic review and want to use RevMan Web, you get a discount. And of course, it's also subscriptions are free in low and middle income countries.
Right. Okay. There's a request for access to the data files that have been shown today because someone's been really keen and has noticed that the files on the knowledge base are actually different from what you've shown us today. So can you tell us what the plan is for that?
Sure. So the files on the knowledge base are templates that are guiding you. So they actually have like a yellow row. The files on the training portal are very similar to the ones I've used. And the only difference is that they haven't looked at subgrouping and the narrower analysis. So what, but we're actually looking into updating those to make sure that the practical exercise on the training hub is cover as much as we do today, because we think that's helpful. So hopefully that explains it. And great to see such enthusiasm.
Great. I think we're running out of time, but there's a follow-up actually to the question about doing the same settings for lots of analyses. And it's that essentially the current guidance for network meta-analysis is you report the direct data in separate analyses, just in order to be able to include them. So maybe that's actually a question for Rachel. Are we going to revisit that guidance now that we have study-centric data in place and we can actually publish it? Do you know of any plans?
I don't know, but it's something to think about and to consider. And yeah, thank you for raising it.
Great. Right. So I think there's a final question, which is the risk of bias only for RCTs or also for observational studies?
Is that, risk of bias too?
I think that's it's not specific in the question. So, but risk of bias too at the moment is only for randomized studies. Mm-hmm. There are kind of variants or tools that are similar to risk of bias too for non-randomized studies, but we don't have them implemented at the moment. And I think the way that risk of bias 1 is built is kind of flexible to allow both.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Indeed, it's Robin's eye for observational studies. Yeah, there is a question in the chat about, well, the question is, how do you calculate the odds ratio if there's only one arm data? I'm not sure I entirely understood the question, but I think it's maybe useful to talk a bit about as well, like what calculations RevMan does for you. But I think Rachel has a response to the question as well.
Yeah, Rebecca, are you able to bring up the slide with the Excel spreadsheet with the detailed results on again?
Absolutely,
and yeah, I think maybe the question, it kind of relates to the spreadsheet. So yeah, so when you're entering contrast level data into the spreadsheet, that you use that in a situation where you only have the effect estimate from a study. So for example, if you've got a cluster randomized study, you might want to use just the direct effect estimate from that study, because the effect estimate will have been adjusted, hopefully, for clustering. So yeah, so then basically you've just got one odds ratio from the study. What you haven't got is kind of like the number of events and the number of people, which we would call arm level data. So yeah, I think that's what the question relates to. So essentially, of course, there is more than one arm in a particular study, but you're just taking an overall effect estimate because that's been adjusted appropriately. I hope that makes sense.
And maybe to sum up or inform, I can also say that all of the statistical methods that RevMan is using are available on the knowledge base for RevMan. And maybe I can just go back to RevMan here for looking at an analysis. And so in terms of the automatic transformations, like I said before, RevMan calculates data, contrast data from arm level data if needed. So if you pick here, you can see if you say you want to include contrast data too, you'll see that we're still including some of the arm level results, and they have been transformed into contrast data. And the other type of calculations RevMan does is to combine arms. So if you have, for example, in a study, 2 types of vitamin D included and tested versus placebo, then if you want to do a broad analysis, then you'd be able to combine those 2 vitamin D arms into one, and then compare the results. RevMan also enables switching reference arm when necessary. Yeah, anything I've missed, Gert?
I think maybe it's also useful to mention that the Excel sheet that you showed is kind of with a minimal number of columns so that it fits on the screen, but it does, like, you can input things like the confidence interval for the log odds ratio, and RevMan will do the calculations for you. So everything essentially that the calculator in RevMan supports is also supported by the import, I believe. So yeah, okay, so I'll move on to other questions. There's a question, where can you change things, like, for example, switching the analysis from odds ratio to risk ratio?
So that is done in the options under the synthesis Pico. So that's the statistical settings that are just the same as in previous versions of RevMan.
Perfect, thanks. And the final question that we have today is, why would you enter the data via a spreadsheet, and why not just input it directly into RevMan?
Yeah, so you could enter it directly into RevMan. That's completely possible. Just let me show you. If we go into this study, you could add a new result, and you would be selecting which outcome, and whether it's arm level or contrast level. Let's just add some arm level data, and then you'd be able to enter your data. But that process can actually be quite laborsome. So adding it in a spreadsheet and hopefully also aligning with the way you extracted the data means that you can import a lot of data into RevMan in one go. You could see how fast it was when I imported the data. So it's basically to save time that we do this. And of course, if you have a review with quite a low number of results, you probably do want to go into the studies and just enter them. But if you have a large review with 50 or hundreds of studies, the import is really going to be a lifesaver.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good time to also mention that Covenants have an export feature that matches the spreadsheet format. So you can also use Covenants and export from Covenants import into RevMan.